I'm here with the one, the only Ian Moreillon. Now, Ian is someone who I have worked with at Nissan Motor Company. I spent 15 years with Nissan Motor Company. Ian was at a much higher level than me. But we did the interview with Kazutoshi Mizuno-san and Toshio Suzuki concerning R35 GT-R. Now, Ian, I think you have a little bit of a behind-the-scenes story concerning your time. Now, I think you went from Nissan Motor Company Australia. You were seconded over to Japan. Talk me through that timing sequence, those dates, and your meetings with a certain Kazutoshi Mizuno-san concerning your involvement, and his involvement, of course, with R35 GT-R. Talk us through it all. Yeah. Where did it all start for you?
Yeah, well, it started well before I went to Japan, Fred. The fact is that I had many different jobs with Nissan Australia, but there was a period in time I was responsible for product planning. And that was in the early 2000s. And I, at that time, used to travel to Japan on a reasonably regular basis. Probably every 3 or 4 months we would find ourselves in Japan because we were reporting from Nissan Australia in through the Japanese office at that point in time. And we were doing product planning, and things like video conferences and Teams meetings and so forth were not in existence.
No, of course. Too early for that.
Too early for that. So we would go over to Japan. And we always found ourselves spending days out at what was known as NTC, out in Natsuki, which is Nissan Technical Centre.
Right, okay.
And it's a massive complex of multi-storey buildings and designers and engineers, but all the people behind all of that, and thousands of people on site. And it's an incredible facility that gets you into the brains of future product. And that future product is in all areas, from the clay models in the studios you would go and inspect. You would go into the wind tunnels, the massive big full-size wind tunnels as well, and things like that. And all of the technology that goes into the years of development of cars before they even actually get a wheel on the road. So I found myself over there when I was manager of product planning in around September 2003. And during that visit, one of the meetings that was scheduled for me was a meeting with this chap called Mizuno-san, who I knew the history of him, but I'd never met him before.
Right.
And anyway, so we were at NTC, and Mizuno-san's meeting was at, I think it was late afternoon from memory, around 4 p.m. And I was with 2 other people from Nissan Australia. And we were told, no, those people, those guys that were with me couldn't go into the meeting. It was only for me as the manager of product planning.
Okay.
And so before I went into the meeting room, though, I had to sign a confidentiality agreement. And I thought, why am I doing this? I'm a Nissan Australia employee.
Yes.
Nissan Australia is owned by Nissan Japan.
Yep.
And but it was to ensure that confidentiality was maintained and people understood that the project that we're about to discuss was an incredibly secretive project at that point in time.
So Ian, did you have any idea what you were about to get into?
Yeah, I did. I knew that it was brief prior to leaving Australia that in this meeting with Mizuno-san, we were going to discuss the next evolution of GT-R.
Right.
And I was aware of that, but I was not aware of where Mizuno-san's vision was going. And so we got into the meeting, or I got into the meeting, and it was a one-on-one. It was Mizuno-san and me only, no one else.
Wow.
And we sat there for 2 hours, and he explained his vision for R35 GT-R. And we knew, of course, the background of Mizuno-san's and his influence on previous models of Nissan cars,
yes.
Especially his influence on some of the aspects of R34.
Yes.
And so, you know, I knew it was going to be very groundbreaking, but when he started off by saying, we're going to build a car that is a true sports car, one statement, very simple, but he said, not just a sports car, this is going to be a supercar. He said it will be a supercar that can be driven by the average person who want to drive a supercar. You don't have to go and buy some of the most expensive cars in the world to drive a supercar. You'll be able to drive a Nissan GT-R that will have the performance, that will outperform, out-handle, out-brake, out-accelerate the supercars of the world.
Hence, he brought in those three immortal words: anyone, anywhere, anytime.
Correct.
Should be able to drive R35
Absolutely.
GT-R.
Yes, exactly. And he told me, and the words that he told me, I wrote down actually. He said, and I'll quote them, they were fast, capable for all drivers, not just race drivers.
Yeah.
And that was the most critical thing that he laid the ground, the platform on of where this car was coming from. Then he got into, in the discussion, talking about, okay, what was he going to do? How was he going to build the car? What's the design of it? What's the chassis? What's the platform? Typically, when you're looking at new cars, new platforms are not built or designed for every new model. You take an existing platform and you'll adapt it to put the new car on.
Absolutely. Cost effective.
Cost effective, exactly. But Mizuno's son was building a new platform. He said, first of all, we want to make sure that this car, under full acceleration and cornering and even braking, is as close as possible to a 50-50 weight distribution.
Yeah.
Now, all of those things will make a car lift up typically at the front, go down at the front under braking, or cornering, go like this and go like that. And that's not always controllable, but he said, we will design a car that controls it as best we possibly can. So some of the design aspects of the car need to be that we shift weight to the back of the car. Subsequently, we will put the transaxle in the back of the car, and whereas typically the gearbox is connected to the engine in most cars.
Yep.
And he said, we'll make it a transaxle and put it to the back with a differential. He said, we will then have an engine up front, which will be strategically placed and located in the car in the best location to maximise the weight distribution in a static position. But in a static position, it's not really 50-50. It is, I think from memory, it's around 47-53, something like that. But under acceleration and general driving, there's a balance point there where it's around the 50-50. That was his objective.
Wow.
And then, of course, the brakes. He spoke, heavily about the brakes. They ended up being Brembos, as we know, in the very first cars that were launched. Then, of course, the transaxle, though, in design, it was very much a race transaxle. It was not just your standard synchro gearbox by any means.
No, it's certainly not.
And with that comes clunks and noises and things like that, and
totally.
and all of those things. But it needed to be high tech. Didn't want to have a straightforward manual gearbox with a stick. It needed to be a high tech control. Subsequently, the paddle shifts, but the ability to have either the automatic function or the manual function as well. And then he spoke about the body. He didn't even have a concept for the design. He actually drew out on a piece of paper the rough shape of how he saw the car at that point in time in September 2003. But the most important thing he spoke about, he said the aerodynamics, he said, will control the shape of the car. He said the aerodynamics that we investigate and determine in the wind tunnel will determine the shape of the car. And there's two aspects, both the body shape, but also the underfloor shape. In the fact that he said, what I want to do to make sure this car can handle as best possible at high speed through corners is to ensure that we have not only strong and capable aerodynamics in the body, but we also have the aerodynamics balanced correctly for the floor as well to create the downforce under the floor. So that meeting, all of that was discussed and more. I can't remember all of it, to be honest.
No, sure.
But all of that was discussed in September 2003, and that's because Australia was roped into this project very, very, when I say roped in, very, very welcoming roped in
Yeah,
because we had such a strong history in GT-R, and Mizuno's son knew that, and he knew of the legendary status of GT-R at Bathurst.
R32,
R32,
Godzilla.
91, 92.
Yeah, sure.
Right, successes there. And so he knew that, and he knew that Australia was a critical market, and for our size of our country and the population and so forth, the actual interest in GT-R in Australia was so much stronger than so many other countries, and such we were there from the start. And then we journeyed it through, in the product planning stage.
And he had this concept in his mind. It was going to be a V6 twin turbo, transaxle in the back, an all-wheel drive grip system, which became a Tessa ETS.
Yes, correct.
It did make those beautiful mechanical clunky noises, which we all love. I call it a mechanical symphony.
Yes, yes.
But he was also very interested in the way the vehicle should be sold, the way the vehicle should be maintained. Talk us through that. After sales for him was very important.
It was. And look, at that time, in the product planning stage and through the development of the car, none of that was really discussed. But this is where I had my second period. They weren't just individual meetings, second period of interaction with Mizuno-san, is that I was asked to go to Japan, as you mentioned earlier, in 2008. And I went over there in April 2008, start of the Japanese financial year. And I went into the role of General Manager Global Sales.
Okay, so you went over to live in Japan then for a period of
4 years all told.
4 years. Okay,
yeah.
wow.
And I lived in a suburb called Akasaka, and at that time the new head office wasn't built, and I was working every day in the old original Ginza head office. So I'd go into there on the train, 4 stations, and that's why I chose where I did. Pretty expensive place to live, but it was great. And I'd go into head office in Ginza. And anyway, so my first meeting with Mizuno-san was very shortly after I got there, because one of the projects that I had to do on the side, as well as being responsible for many aspects of global sales, was to develop a set of standards, because my history back in Australia before going over there was heavily committed also to driving customer satisfaction in Australia. So they knew that. And Endo-san, who was the Senior Vice President who asked me to come to Japan, he knew that I had this background and he wanted to use that in the development of the GT-R sales and service standards. So he introduced me to Mizuno-san, and Endo-san was a board member, executive board member for Nissan Global, working for Carlos Ghosn at the time. And so I was only one step away from that there. And then I was introduced to Mizuno-san, and Mizuno-san briefed us on his vision then, another vision that he had for how GT-R would be sold. Now, that was in April. Pretty much happened, as I said, as soon as I got there. That was in April 2008. GT-R was actually launched in Japan to the Japanese domestic market in December 2007.
Oh, 2007?
Yes.
For the Japan domestic market. Okay.
And he had confidence because of, the Japanese dealers and the Japanese are very thorough, of course, very process-driven people, as we know.
Yeah.
So he had total confidence that the Japanese would sell the car correctly. But to be honest, he didn't have confidence that the rest of the world would, especially the US.
Right. Okay.
He kind of saw the US as bits of cowboys in some respects. Right?
Yeah.
So he wanted a set of standards developed that controlled how GT-R was sold when a car turned up at the dealership.
Yeah.
What happened from that point on? Who could sell it? What level of knowledge did you need to have? What was the training component? What certification you required in both the sales and the service area?
Both, absolutely.
But not only that, what pre-delivery actions needed to take place?
Yeah.
The preparation for the car. Did the car need to be driven on a test drive or not? Were you allowed to drive it on a test drive or not? Who could be the test driver with the customer, etc., etc.? All of this needed to be a full documented set of standards. So we very quickly put together a full set of standards, and that had to happen before the car was launched in the US in July 2008.
Right.
So we had about 3 months to do this, and so we did that, presented it back to Mizuno-san many times, and we're in many meetings also with Carlos Ghosn as well, because Mizuno-san, whilst he didn't directly report to Carlos Ghosn on paper, he actually reported to Carlos Ghosn though in practice, because Carlos Ghosn said, Mizuno-san, you're going to build this car and I want to have updates, etc., etc. So he was updating Carlos Ghosn all the way along.
Okay.
So there was a couple of meetings there where we were an element of the meeting on the status of GT-R, and we had to present in 10 minutes or so our progress on developing these standards as part of the greater meeting on the progress of GT-R rolling out to the global market.
Right.
So that they were developed in that way.
And as far as Suzuki-san goes, Toshio Suzuki, who, apart from many, many other things, champion racing driver, gentleman, multiple champion. I think you were saying you spent a day at a racetrack in Japan with Mizuno-san and Suzuki-san.
Yeah.
So did Suzuki-san take you for a blast in an R35 GT-R?
Yeah, he did. He did. And,
Everyone's dream. That's my dream.
Yeah, he did, and I was lucky enough to do that. I suppose your objectives always exceed reality. I wanted him to actually take me a blast around the Nürburgring, and I never got to do that.
Oh, right, okay. But second best.
I went to Atsugi, to Sendai racetrack in the north. It's north of Tokyo. And that racetrack, it's a complex little track. It's I think it's around 3 miles, they called it, or probably about 5 kilometres in length, something like that, at Sendai. And Sendai, we went up there, and Mizuno-san was there as well. And I took some of the people who worked for me with me. We all went up there because part of the day was that we had to present to Mizuno-san the final sales and service standards on that day, actually at Sendai. So we went into a room up there and we had to present to him. Now, I thought we'd have a fairly short meeting. Well, we didn't, because first of all, Mizuno-san stood up there and spoke for an hour and a half on GT-R.
Wow.
He went over everything about GT-R and how we've got to the point where we're at now, where they were at that point in time about to push the button on production. And the production, of course, the car was made at Tochigi plant, north of Tokyo as well. And Tochigi is where typically a lot of the Infinities are made, and Z was made out of there in the end and so forth. And he went through a whole lot of stuff. And in the end, then we presented our presentation, and he had to be happy, and he signed off on that day. And he said, okay, now we will go and experience what this car is all about. And he had 2 other cars there. He had an M6 BMW coupe, and he also had a 911 there. I think it was a GT2 from memory. I don't think GT3 was out by then. And they were the benchmarks. And then Suzuki-san was there, and he first of all allowed us to have a drive of all 3 cars, including the BMW and the Porsche. And then we hopped in the GT-R as the 3rd car. We always drove the other 2 first. Hopped in the GT-R and just blew our mind, right? Then to cap it off at the end of the day, Suzuki-san did take us for some laps with him driving around Sendai racetrack. It was an amazing day, actually. A very, very fun day. Very fun day, especially if you're a car enthusiast.
And Ian, the standards were set, the design of the car was signed off. The standards were set for the world. What about customers? When customers came into a Nissan High Performance Centre, NHPC it became. So R35 GT-R was sold through NHPC centres all around the globe. There was a customer disclosure agreement. Talk me through that. That was an agreement because GT-R was different. because GT-R had a carbon fibre prop shaft that when you started the vehicle up,
Yep.
it spun with engine revs. It had an ultralight flywheel, which didn't absorb engine fluctuations as much, but it gave it a fantastic rate of acceleration. And of course, the Borg-Warner GR6 transaxle in the back was virtually dry sump. So we mentioned earlier the mechanical symphony.
Yep.
And it also had huge brakes on it, cast iron, and later on they became carbon, ceramic. But even with the cast iron brakes, the pads had a very high metal content. So if the brakes were cold, you came up to a set of lights, there'd be a noise.
Right. Yeah.
Quite normal, because you could drive this car to and from work with the Bose stereo on in
Absolutely.
deep of drive, or you could take it to a racetrack on Friday, Saturday and Sunday.
Have some fun.
Put the gear lever over and use the paddle shift. So the braking system had to be able to do both. But did you develop the customer disclosure agreement, you and your team?
The customer disclosure agreement was part of it, but it wasn't all of it. The fact is that we had to control the sales process, so it wasn't just the average salesperson who could sell the car. It had to be the dealer principal or the general manager who were trained, and we know that in Australia, for example, we had an extensive training process for this.
And Ian, if I could just ask, this wasn't every Nissan dealership. These were chosen Nissan dealerships that became, a part of them were NHPC.
Nissan High Performance Centres.
Yeah,
13 of them in Australia.
Okay.
They were. And in fact, when I got back to Australia, I ultimately, when I came back here, was involved in setting up the Nissan High Performance Centres as well, from first of all afar when I was in Japan, and then certainly following it on when we got back to Australia.
Okay.
But the NHPC, there was 13 of them in Australia, all told. There was a few more a little later on, but they were the initial 13. And so they were kind of sought after because everyone, dealers being dealers, they saw the ability to sell a GT-R as a real prize. And but Nissan Australia and Nissan globally said, no, you will only sell it. We don't want to have the opportunity for dealers to start discounting the car and affecting the customer experience and things like that. So they restricted the number of NHPC centres in each capital city. And that happened not just in Australia, but also globally in Europe and the US and everywhere. So we did that. And part of that process, though, was getting the customer to also understand what the car was and how it performed and what to expect from the car. So this car was in many aspects, a race car in disguise of a supercar in disguise of an everyday drive car.
It really has a Jekyll and Hyde type scenario.
You can drive it to the milk bar every day of the week if you want to, or you can take it down to Phillip Island and drive it at speed and have an enormous amount of thrill in driving that car around Phillip Island.
And by the way, Phillip Island is an amazing racetrack in Victoria, Australia.
That's right. And probably one of the racetracks that is a real driver's track.
Yeah.
There are many racetracks that are great because they're good to see or vision for people to watch, but it's a driver's track. And
especially turn one.
Oh, exactly. And this car is perfect for a track like Phillip Island. It really is.
Yeah.
It shows the attributes of this car. So anyway, so the customer needed to understand what they're getting into. Subsequently, the agreement, and Mizuno-san, he was adamant, absolutely adamant that this agreement was part of the sales process. The customer had to sign this agreement when they purchased a car and took delivery of the car. The fact that we understand the transmission's got a noise in it, a rattle in it, if you use simple terms. The fuel filling was a little bit different also than...
Especially when it was raging hot.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly, than the standard car and, that you have in your garage. And the brakes, as you mentioned earlier, Fred, the brakes work a little bit differently, and especially when they're cold. They need to get warmed up before they really start to perform well. and elements like that. So he did not want people having dissatisfaction with the car that he designed. They had to accept it from the start that these elements and design characteristics were in the car. That's what you're buying.
So they were engineered in.
They were engineered in.
Part of it.
They were part of it. And so if you wanted to have a transmission that performed in that manner, you have to accept this.
Yeah.
If you wanted to have a set of brakes that performed in that manner, you have to accept this. And so each customer had to sign the disclaimer to understand that they would not come back and say, I'm not happy with this because it's got a transmission noise. That's it. That's what you bought, Mr. Customer. So along with all of the other aspects that were so positive about this car.
Absolutely. You were there at the start of R35 GT-R.
Mm-hmm.
Take me inside the mind of Kazutoshi Mizuno. What did you think of him? What did you think about the way he went about things? This grand vision of making a supercar that would do an AutoLife lap record, or you could drive in your boss suit if you had one, to and from work with the Bose stereo on, which had a 3.8 litre twin turbocharged hand-built V6. It had an ultralight flywheel housing hanging off that VR38 DTT, carbon fibre prop shaft that span with engine revs, Borg-Warner GR6 transaxle in the back, another prop shaft giving all-wheel drive for the Atessa ETS. What an amazing machine he came up with.
Oh, it was.
Talk me through what you thought about his design process, the way he worked. What did you think of it all?
Well, I suppose there was one big difference right from the very start in what I saw, because I had the ability to understand and meet with designers in my role in product planning over many different cars, from passenger cars like a Pulsar or something like that, to a four-wheel drive like a Patrol, two ends of the scale. So, you know, something like a Pulsar, you know, it's a very simplistic sort of concept that you're looking for. You want a small car that is comfortable, economical, performs to the expected standard, etc., but you are contained in many respects by the cost that's built into that car. Because at the end of the day, it'll be a high volume car that has to be sold in volume. And that's what the world wants.
Yeah.
So the characteristics that you need to look at when you're designing a car like that are totally different to what Mizuno-san was looking at when he was designing GT-R. So right from the start, he didn't have to worry about cost so much. I don't think cost really took much of his attention until well down the track of the design process of GT-R. He was more focused on what he wanted the car to do. So when you were designing a Pulsar, you weren't really that worried about, I want it to be the best handling small car in the market. It'll handle well, it'll do the job to the average expectation.
Sure. Yeah.
But GT-R, he wanted it to be handling in a particular manner and the performance in a particular sphere, and then the concept of the weight distribution I spoke of earlier, the aerodynamic elements of it. So he had a vision for the car that was so totally different to chief vehicle engineers' normal vision when they are looking at developing a car. His vision was based on elements of the design that typically are just, they come later, or they are outcomes from other parts of the design. But he brought them right up front, and I've never met a man in my time, certainly with Nissan, that had such a strong vision for what he wanted without the concept of what it looked like.
Wow.
And so he wanted to tick all these boxes, but he actually didn't know, he had a bit of an idea in his head about how the car was going to look, because he drew it for me, as I said, in an outline, but it was very basic. But and it was always going to be a longer car and a sleek car, but he didn't really have, a true look or design of the car was going to look, but he knew what he wanted to achieve. And that was the difference to me, that back in 2003, that was all the mechanical elements of the concept and the objectives about the performance of the car that he wanted to achieve before he even had any final design of the car or anything like that, or concept of design. Like, one of the things was he was fascinated by the Nürburgring, as we all know.
Yeah.
And for years he kept going back there with multiple drivers. Suzuki-san was his main driver at the Nürburgring, but wasn't the only driver. He used the likes of Michael Krum, also, European racer, raced for GT500 in Japan for many years, etc., etc. He used him, and he used a few other drivers as well. But Suzuki-san has done thousands of laps around the Nürburgring, and he was fascinated. So right from the start, that Mizuno-san knew that Porsche was especially the car that he had to beat at the Nürburgring.
Yeah.
And he set out to do that right from the start. That was in his head. He mentioned that, right? And so, that was there. And then for many years after, of course, he kept going back, and I think he got to the point where he beat the Porsche GT2 or whatever. And I think 7 minutes and 27 seconds or something like that, around the Nürburgring. Yeah. And he achieved his objective, and of course, even back then, it was substantially quicker than even the Lamborghini Aventador and cars like that around there. But he was a man with vision. He was a man that had an objective that was not the normal objective when you are designing a car. The actual shape of the car came later in some respects. Still, when I say later, it came well after 2003. But then we saw in the product planning responsibilities we had, I went back there in subsequent years later and saw the clay models, and saw the car in the studio and the test mules and the like. Never drove it, never really had any involvement to any great degree during that time, other than he wanted to keep us informed on the program all the way along, knowing that Australia would ultimately one day sell this car, which we ended up doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ian, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for joining us on the AutoLife.
No problems at all, Fred. It's a small part of the story of such an iconic car, and it's a car that I love driving, and wish I had one in the garage, Fred.
So good on you. Thank you.
Thank you.